Hey everyone and welcome back to another World of Warcraft video. So thankfully it does actually seem like 8.2 is almost on PTR. But you know what? It's April. Patch 8.1 was extremely late, and while I am expecting PTR any day now, 8.2 is late. By this time in Legion, 7.2 had already existed, it had been released, and both expansions had a 0.1 and a 0.15 patch after release, just that Legion's minor patches were more content-rich. Now, I've heard rumors that 8.2 was supposed to release in May, which itself I thought was pretty late, yet here we are in April with PTR likely releasing this very week. And it's a strange situation that I think has many people worried. It seems like a combination of design pivots and general slowness have led to this, with perhaps the layoffs in the World of Warcraft QA department holding up the deployment of this patch even more. First, let's go back in time to Legion. It launched on the 30th of August 2016. We then went right into the 7.1 PTR on the 14th of September, with 8.1 releasing on the 25th of October. Then a fortnight later, we were right into the 7.1.5 PTR, with that patch of course bringing the Nighthold raid, when it eventually released on the 10th of January. Now, then guess what happened? 9 days later, 7.2 hit the PTR, with its launch being on the 28th of March 2017. The rest of the expansion follows suit, near constant utilization of the public test realm and patches that were almost all 77 days apart. Of course, my goal in doing this, and what kicked off this video, was trying to work out when 8.2 would actually release. Now, the PTR of patch 7.2 went live 2 days after Nighthold released. Crucible releases on the 16th of April, so for me the late estimate here is that the PTR for 8.2 would likely be the Thursday after. But here's the thing, it would darn well have to be, because, well, if we just think about the timing here. Throughout Legion, PTR periods varied, but most of them ended up around the 60-day mark, with patch 7.2 having a 68-day PTR cycle. So how does this apply to Rise of Ashara? Well, if it hits the PTR Thursday after Crucible launches and takes 68 days, then that would have it releasing on the 25th of June. Now, given the date of this upload, well, just about any other estimate would have the patch dropping sometime mid to late July. The only fast PTR of Legion was 7.3.2, but of course it had no unlock bar Antorus, with 7.2 taking 68 days and 7.3 taking 62 days. So for patch 8.2, we really are looking at best at a mid-June release. Being realistic, maybe even late June, and worst case early July. Guess what also comes out on the 2nd of July though? Final Fantasy XIV Shadowbringers. Yeah, I know. Now, while the lateness could be down to production issues, they might have delayed it to compete. Blizzard have always said they don't do that, but come on, they've pretty much always released to directly compete. I mean, the MoP pre-patch was the same day as Guild Wars 2 launch. The same thing happened for Wildstar. They released Tomb of Sargeras on the same day as Final Fantasy XIV Stormblood. So yeah, they totally do that. Unfortunately though, this is part of a pattern, because 8.1 is something that Blizzard admitted was late. Now, Legion patch 7.1 launched 57 days after Legion's release date, while 8.1 launched 119 days after BfA's release date. Legion patch 7.1.5 launched 77 days after 7.1, meaning that in the time that it took Blizzard to ship patch 8.1, well, for Legion, they had already shipped, by that number of days, 7.1 and 7.15. And Legion just continued that smooth pace of content right up to 7.3.5, which launched in January 2018, and of course was eventually used to bring allied races once the BfA pre-orders went up. And you know what? It's a little bit scary, because if you put it this way, from Legion launch to patch 7.2 was 210 days. From Legion launch to patch 7.3 was 365 days. If we assume the 25th of June, then BfA launch to patch 8.2 would be 315 days. That means that relatively speaking, patch 8.2 is closer to patch 7.3 in its relative timing. And that does kind of show you how far behind Blizzard are with Battle for Azeroth content development. Now, I guess here's the worrying thing. Like, I had heard, the sort of rumors were circulating amongst those in the know of a planned May release date for Nazjatar. That was quite a while ago that everyone heard that, but here's the thing, there's just no way that this patch could release in May. Why? Well, almost every Legion major patch had a PTR cycle of over 60 days. Additionally, 8.2's PTR will involve some raid testing, as well as the testing of the Mechagon meta dungeon and all of the new systems. And that stuff, from what we've been led to believe, that's like a lot of really ambitious content, so that's going to take a while to test. There's no way that this is going to be a significantly faster than normal public test realm process, especially when you think about how much longer 8.1 took than I think one would have expected. Additionally, we all know that the WoW development team itself wasn't impacted by the job losses, but we do know that the QA team for World of Warcraft was heavily impacted, with Blizzard not being able to, supposedly according to rumors that I heard, field a mythic internal raid team within QA, which is kind of wild. And I mean, this just does lead me to believe that in addition to very troubled development, which I think even Blizzard themselves do admit, they also have been hit with QA problems, perhaps. I mean, given the timing, it makes sense. And those things have combined to delay this patch. Now, I suppose that's all fine, it all does make sense, and I absolutely empathize with the situation that Ian and the team find themselves in, and of course I've been very positive about their recent reviews, but from a consumer's perspective, it's not looking too great, especially because of how content-light Battle for Azeroth really has been so far as compared to Legion, because when you start comparing the expansions, it's not pretty. Both shipped with leveling experiences of essentially equal length, just that Legion also had Suramar, which took hours to complete and also contained the Withered minigame. Battle for Azeroth has nothing comparable to the launch version of Suramar, and none of the Battle for Azeroth patches added anything significant in that regard, with most of the quest content of BfA being really short. As for the war campaigns, well, the combined war campaigns of BfA launch, patch 8.1 and patch 8.5 maybe amount to the same content as the artifact acquisition quests combined. Maybe a few of the order halls. I mean, BfA had all that, plus the class order hall campaigns, with the single classes campaign being, or well, two classes campaigns, I'd say, being equal to one faction's war campaign in BfA. And that's just the casual content for the non-raiding masses. And really, for that type of content, BfA was pretty lacking, with BfA plus its first two patches not really having parity with Legion launch. And I think that's just a little bit wild. Okay, but like, what if we compare 8.1 and 7.1? Well, 7.1 had a massive new dungeon and the Trial of Valor raid. It also added the new Helya-themed world quests and 10 weeks of Suramar content. That was really a lot of good quality quest content. I mean, 8.1, yeah, it added a new warfront, but nobody really likes them that much. Yeah, the islands came, but nobody really likes them that much. They kind of felt the same as the launch ones. As for the faction incursions, well, that was just hitting parity with the standard Legion gameplay experience that everyone had already gotten used to. There was nothing even close to the content provided by Karazhan or Suramar. The systems changes were really nice, but I don't think they're content. As for 8.1.5, well, two new allied races just doesn't amount to that much content. It's just two quick scenarios and another reason to level up a character. It did bring back the Brawlers Guild, but so did Legion patch 7.1.5, of course, albeit without the great quest that actually came in. And yeah, 8.1.5 brought in WoD time walking, but 7.1.5 brought in MoP time walking. 8.1.5 did add new profession quests, and that's fine, but what else? More of the war campaign, which, I mean, thus far, they've not really added together to create parity with the Legion launch content that fills the same niche. So it's a really odd situation, isn't it? The raid content, of course, is all similar, so once you kind of eliminate that, take the raid stuff out of the equation for a second, you see how much worse off BfA is. Now, when we look forward to 8.2, I actually think it's going to be significantly better than 7.2. Based on what Blizzard have said, it might have some of the best world content yet, so that's something that we can't forget here. They do seem to be trying very hard with patch 8.2, and it is worth keeping that in mind. I mean, content-wise, well, Nazjatar based on the development map, if we look at that, it seems to be basically a single zone, maybe a little bit larger than the average zone, so maybe the size of Krokun or Makari. Mechagon is smaller, I think a little bit smaller than the Timeless Isle, so 8.2 will probably have 2/3 of the world content of 7.3, but likely with significantly better systems, which I am excited for. And then, when it comes to the new dungeon, well, that only brings us to Legion parity with Karazhan, because by this time in Legion, we had the new mega dungeon of Karazhan, plus the cathedral from 7.2. And we've got to bear in mind how much later in this expansion's life cycle 8.2 is coming. And I mean, this has been a strange video making it, because, like, the reason this video happened is because I was just trying to work out what the 8.2 release date was, and I just, I put all the numbers down on a bit of paper and thought, oh my god, wow. When I just kind of realized the comparative timings and how sort of bizarre they are. As for what caused this, well, I think it's just assumptions that didn't pan out. The core of BfA's problem is just stuff not being in line with reality. They expected islands to be far more replayable than they were. They expected warfronts to be, I mean, relevant to gameplay in some way. They expected Azerite to be infinitely satisfying, being better than Legion's artifacts. These things were clearly the pillars of Battle for Azeroth, but they didn't work out. Blizzard seems to have become a little bit obsessed with systematizing their work, likely because of how much bang for their buck they can get from doing that. That's totally fair, but they just didn't end up having fun enough systems to make that big strategy work. In doing this, they kind of deprioritized the core RPG content. Things like Suramar that Legion did so well, to the point where, yeah, BfA 2 patches in doesn't have nearly the same amount of like endgame narrative, sort of RPG content. And that's something Legion actually did pretty well in its first, well, really, I mean, throughout most of its life. So yeah, it's a bit wild. Most of these problems, of course, were identified by players early on. I made a video right after the BfA announcement BlizzCon that listed Warfronts as a worry, really, about just not knowing what they were. The video overall talks about how vague everything was, and I was positive about Islands, but listening back to it, I clearly had an impression of what Islands would be that was a lot more about them being a puzzle, when in reality they did just turn out to be big Zergs. And then I did end the Island segment about just saying I was worried about if it would translate into reality, and suffice to say, I was right to be worried. So to draw this together, I think, you know, Battle for Azeroth launched in a pretty bad state with significantly less content. Each patch has brought about improvements, but Blizzard made assumptions about the pillars of this expansion's content. They worked on those things instead of the core RPG content that Legion had at launch, and I think that has left us with a pretty underwhelming expansion from a systems and content perspective. There's just no way that 8.2 is not going to be late. The game will suffer heavily until then. Now, I'm extremely hopeful for this patch, but having the first major content patch come out slightly over 10 months after the expansion, frankly, I think that is not really good enough. I think that's something Blizzard will need to think long and hard about. They need to think about how their ideas are filtered, how the value of their ideas is weighted. Is this an old traditional team structure that very much places design power in the hands of team leads? Is there sort of positive company culture, something that creates a design echo chamber? Clearly there's something there with their idea systems internally that's just not producing excellent quality ideas, or perhaps just not letting the critical mechanisms play out that would help to hone those ideas. Combine this stuff with QA cuts holding them back, and the CM team cuts damaging their ability to communicate and collate feedback, and yeah, it's a really rough spot. Now, based on what Ian recently said, this next patch is packed with the right ideas. Indeed, I suspect this patch will be significantly better than 7.2, which, let's be real, was a bit of a dud from a world content perspective. Really, I almost feel like 8.2 could feel like more of an expansion than 8.0 in many ways, at least from a mechanical perspective and how our characters feel to play. So there you go, that's a roundup on just what's going on with the WoW team's output. It's kind of wild. I'd love to see them address this and just sort of speak frankly about it at some stage. You know, I think a lot of players have got frustrated with this element of World of Warcraft. They don't feel like they're getting value for money. There's probably been quite a lot of unsubs, and I think it would make sense for Blizzard to just say, hey, yeah, this is the stuff that's happened. We're sorry that stuff's late. Here's the plan going forward. I know they're really hesitant to commit to further on plans, but we are in an era where we're seeing companies talk about their year-long roadmaps and what they have planned for their games. It would be nice if Blizzard could get into a state of being able to talk about that. I think that would be really good for them and would help to set community expectations. So there you go. That's my thought on this very, I guess, odd, I think interesting topic. Let me know what you think down below, and I suppose do keep in mind, within the next 3 days, we're probably going to see 8.2 in the PTR, and there'll be a lot to talk about then. So let me know what you think. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.